My hand came down hard, not a tap, not a gentle brush, a full, open-palmed slap against the back of the most powerful neck in all of Thornvale. I froze. The entire ballroom froze. The music stopped mid-note. Crystal glasses held still in gloved hands. Even the candles seemed afraid to flicker. I had just struck the Duke of Greyholm, the man who could ruin a family with one word. The man whose cold eyes had never once shown mercy in any court, any hall, or any drawing room across the whole of the empire. The man every mother warned her daughter about, and every lord feared in secret. I had slapped him, because of a spider. He turned slowly, so slowly that my heart forgot how to beat. His jaw was set like carved stone. His dark eyes found mine across the shocked silence of 300 witnesses. Then he did something nobody in that room expected. He raised one gloved hand and pressed it gently against the spot where my palm had landed. He rubbed it. Once. Twice. And then, in a voice so low that only I could hear it, he whispered 4 words that changed everything. "Do it again." I did not breathe. I did not move. And I have not been the same since that night. Now tell me, if you were standing in that ballroom, what would you have done next? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story already has your heart, subscribe. You do not want to miss what happens next. My name is Tessalee Drummond, and I was never supposed to be at that ball. I was there because Lady Orin needed a companion. Not a friend. Not a guest. A companion. That was the word she used when she summoned me to her sitting room 3 days before the Greyholm winter gathering. She sat behind her writing desk with her rings catching the firelight, and her chin lifted the way it always was when she was about to say something that required no argument. "You will accompany me," she said. "You will stand near the east wall, you will speak only when spoken to, and you will not embarrass me." I was the daughter of a disgraced solicitor. My father had made the terrible mistake of standing against Lord Veyron in a land dispute 4 years prior, and Lord Veyron had made the equally terrible decision to destroy him for it, when my father lost his practice, his reputation, and eventually his health. He passed the following winter, leaving me with a modest dress, a borrowed pair of gloves, and a debt I would spend the next decade repaying. Lady Orin had taken me in not out of kindness, but out of convenience. She needed someone to carry her correspondence, read her letters aloud when her eyes grew tired, and sit quietly in corners at events so she would not appear entirely alone. I was useful. That was all. So when she said I would attend the Greyholm winter gathering, I did not argue. I pressed my dress, I pinned my hair, and I reminded myself of the single rule I had carried since my father's ruin. Do not draw attention. Do not be seen. Be invisible. I failed spectacularly. Or the Greyholm estate sat on the northern edge of the county, like a crown that had never been removed. Its gates were iron and tall, its torches burning gold against the cold night air. Carriages lined the full length of the drive. I counted 14 before I stopped counting. Inside, the great hall opened into a ballroom, so wide and so bright that I had to press my lips together to keep from making a sound. 3 chandeliers hung from the ceiling, each one carrying what looked like 1,000 candles. The floor was pale and polished. The walls were lined with portraits of men who all had the same jaw, the same dark stare, the same unmistakable bearing that said they had never once been told no. And at the far end of the room, standing apart from everyone else with a glass he had not yet touched, was the Duke of Greyholm himself, And Dorian Greyholm. I had heard his name 100 times, but never seen his face. He was taller than I expected, broader across the shoulder. His coat was dark and perfectly fitted, and he wore no decoration except the single crest pin at his collar, which told every person in the room exactly who he was, as though there were any questions. His hair was dark and slightly longer than fashion permitted, which somehow made him look more powerful rather than less. His expression was closed, not unkind exactly, but sealed. Like a letter no one had been given permission to open. Every woman in the room was aware of him. I could feel it. The way conversations turned slightly in his direction. The way fans moved a little faster. The way mothers straightened and daughters suddenly remembered to smile. I looked away and found my place near the east wall as instructed. Lady Orin disappeared into the crowd within minutes, which was entirely expected. She had her own acquaintances, her own games to play. I stood where I was told, watched the dancing from a distance, and occupied myself by memorizing the details of the ceiling plasterwork. It was during my study of the third chandelier bracket that I felt it. A movement. Small and quick and horrible. Something was crawling along the back of the tall gentleman standing directly in front of me. He was broad and still and had his back turned completely. I could see the thing clearly from where I stood. A spider. Large enough to notice. Moving steadily upward along the back of his neck toward his collar. My stomach turned. I am not, by nature, a woman who screams. And my father raised me to think before I acted, to measure before I spoke. But there are things in this world that bypass thought entirely, and spiders are among them. Before my mind could stop my body, my hand came down hard against the back of his neck in one sharp, open-palmed slap. The spider flew. The man stilled. Every sound in the room stopped, as though someone had lifted the needle from a music box. I stood there with my hand still raised, and my face burning, and the full, terrible understanding of what I had just done, arriving in my chest like a stone, dropped into still water. He turned, slowly, with the kind of control that only comes from a person who has never in their life reacted without choosing to, and I found myself looking directly into the face of Dorian Greyholm, Duke of Greyholm, or the most feared and powerful man in 3 counties. His dark eyes met mine. They were not angry. That was the first thing I noticed, and it confused me more than anger would have. They were steady and sharp and searching, and they moved over my face the way a person reads something they find unexpectedly interesting. 300 people were watching. I could not speak. I could not move. I could only stand there in my pressed dress and my borrowed gloves, with my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. He raised one hand and pressed it against the back of his neck. He rubbed the spot slowly. Once. Twice. Then he leaned forward just slightly, and his voice came low and quiet, and meant only for me. Do it again. I stopped breathing entirely. He held my gaze for one more second, or then turned back to face the room as though nothing had occurred, as though 300 people had not just witnessed a penniless companion slap the Duke of Greyholm at his own winter gathering. Someone laughed nervously. Then the music started again. Then the room breathed. I pressed myself back against the east wall and tried to remember how my lungs worked. Lady Orin appeared at my elbow within minutes, her face, a careful arrangement of fury, held under a thin layer of social composure. "What?" she said very quietly. "Did did you just do?" "There was a spider," I said. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she turned away without another word, which somehow felt worse than anything she could have said. I spent the remainder of the first hour standing very still and watching the floor and telling myself it was over. It was a strange moment. The Duke had been unusual about it, yes, but powerful men were often unusual when they chose to be. It meant nothing. He would forget me by morning. Men like him forgot women like me before the candles burned down. Then his steward crossed the room and stopped in front of me. He was a small man with careful eyes, and a manner so precise it felt like every word he spoke had been measured first. "His Grace requests the pleasure of your company for the next dance," he said. I blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "His Grace," the steward repeated patiently, "requests your company for the next dance." The room had not stopped this time. No one had heard. But I felt the eyes anyway, the way you feel weather changing before the clouds arrive. Lady Orin was somewhere across the room. Lord Veyron, my father's old enemy, that was standing not 15 feet away with his wife and his smug, narrow face. Several young ladies who had been waiting the entire evening for exactly this invitation were watching from behind their fans. I should have declined. I should have said I was unwell or untrained or otherwise unavailable for any reason I could manufacture. Instead, I said the only honest thing I had. "I am not a very accomplished dancer, Your Grace." The steward blinked as though no one had ever said such a thing before in his professional life. He carried my answer back across the room. A moment passed. Then he returned. "His Grace says that is perfectly agreeable."
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
I danced with the Duke of Greyholm, and I was terrible at it. Not dramatically terrible. Not the kind of terrible that sends china crashing or partners stumbling. Just quietly, consistently terrible in the way of someone who learned the steps once, years ago, in a small parlor with a mother who was more patient than skilled. I counted under my breath. I moved half a beat behind. I looked at my feet twice when I shouldn't have. He did not comment on any of it. He guided me through the figure with a steadiness that made my fumbles feel smaller than they were, adjusting his pace without drawing attention to it. His hand at my back, light and correct and entirely proper. But it was not the dancing that undid me. It was the silence. Dorian Greyholm didn't speak for the first full minute of the dance. In my experience, our silences at balls were either empty or pointed. This one was neither. It was full, occupied, as though he was thinking something specific and had decided to let me stand inside that thought without explaining it. Then he spoke. "You did not scream," he said. I glanced up. "Your Grace, the spider. Most women scream. You did not." I considered that for a moment. "I screamed on the inside," I said honestly. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but a movement in that direction. "And on the outside, you chose violence," he said. "I chose action," I corrected before I could stop myself. This time the movement was unmistakable. It lasted only a second, and then his expression returned to its usual sealed composure. But I had seen it. I filed it away like something valuable and strange. "You are Lady Orin's companion," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." "Tessalie Drummond," he said. Not a question. He already knew. "Yes," I said, and the fact that he knew my name did something peculiar to the air in my chest. Your father was Aldous Drummond," he continued. "The solicitor." I kept my chin level. He was. "Lord Veyron's matter," he said. "Yes." He said nothing further on that subject, and I did not invite him to. We completed the next figure in silence, and I concentrated on not disgracing myself further with my footwork, but my mind was running fast beneath the stillness. He knew my father's name. He knew the case. Men like Dorian Greyholm didn't carry random facts about disgraced solicitors in their memory without reason. When the dance ended, he returned me to the east wall with perfect courtesy, and a bow that was neither excessive nor dismissive, just correct. Then he straightened and looked at me with those sealed dark eyes and said, "The spider, Miss Drummond, did it survive?" I thought about it. "I believe so, Your Grace. I saw it land on the floor and move toward the drape." "Good," he said. And then he walked away. I stood against the east wall and stared at the middle distance, and felt, for the first time in 4 years, like something was happening to me that I did not have a category for. Lady Orin found me before the next set began. Her expression had changed from fury to something more complicated. Calculation, perhaps. Interest sharpened by confusion. She studied my face, the way she studied letters that contained unexpected news. "He danced with you," she said. "Yes." "He has not danced with anyone in 2 seasons. I had not known that. "I did not seek it," I said. "No," she agreed slowly, "which is perhaps why he offered it." She said nothing more and moved away again, but something in her manner toward me had shifted by the smallest but most meaningful degree. She did not summon me for the remainder of the evening. She did not position me near the wall with instructions. She simply left me to exist in the room as something more than furniture, which from Lady Orin was nearly an act of generosity. I was watching the 3rd set of dancing when Lord Veyron approached me. He was a tall man, lean and long-jawed, with the kind of handsomeness that had curdled slightly over the years into something harder. He wore his consequence like a coat he had owned too long and stopped appreciating. His wife, Lady Veyron, a thin and watchful woman named Prunella, stood 2 steps behind him with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Miss Drummond," Lord Veyron said pleasantly. Pleasantly the way a blade is pleasant when it has not yet been drawn. "Lord Veyron," I replied, "I did not expect to see you here." He let that sit for a moment. "In this company." "Lady Orin was kind enough to include me," I said. "Of course." His eyes moved across the room toward where Dorian Greyholm now stood, speaking with 2 other lords near the fireplace. "I see you have made an impression this evening." "I made a mistake," I said. "His Grace was gracious about it." Lord Veyron's smile did not change, but his eyes did. They became sharper, more interested. "Dorian Greyholm is not known for grace," he said quietly. "He is known for memory. Be careful what you invite, Miss Drummond. Men like him do not notice things without purpose." He nodded politely and moved on, Prunella gliding after him like a shadow that had been trained. I turned the words over in my mind for a long time after. Men like him do not notice things without purpose. Across the room, I saw the Duke speak briefly to his steward. The steward nodded, wrote something small on a card, and disappeared. 20 minutes later, a footman arrived at my elbow and placed a folded note in my gloved hand. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was precise and even, the letters formed with the kind of deliberateness that spoke of someone who wrote to be clear, not to be admired. It read, "I knew your father, Miss Drummond. He was the most honest man I ever watched be destroyed for his honesty. I have not forgotten the details of that matter. If you are willing, I would speak with you again. Not tonight. Send word through Mrs. Ketterley at the Thornvale post office. She is trustworthy." There was no signature. There did not need to be. I folded the note and pressed it into my glove against my palm, and stood very still while the music played and the candles burned, and 300 people moved around me, knowing nothing of what had just landed in my hand. My father had been an honest man. That was true, and honesty in a world that preferred comfortable lies had cost him everything. 4 years I had carried the weight of that. 4 years of borrowed gloves and east walls and being useful rather than seen. 4 years of swallowing the anger because there was nowhere safe to put it. And now the most powerful man in 3 counties was telling me he remembered, that he had not forgotten, that he thought my father honest. I pressed my hand against my side to feel the note against my palm. Near the fireplace, Dorian Greyholm didn't look in my direction. He was deep in conversation, his profile sharp in the firelight, his expression giving nothing away to any of the 300 people watching him. But I knew, with a certainty I could not explain and could not dismiss, that he was entirely aware of exactly where I was standing. Lord Veyron crossed the room again some time later, this time moving toward the Duke with his hand extended and his easy nobleman's smile already arranged. I watched Dorian Greyholm turn to meet him, and their exchange was brief and correct, and told me nothing from where I stood. But when Lord Veyron moved away, I saw the Duke glance once, quickly in my direction. Just once. Just long enough to confirm something. Then he returned to his conversation, and I returned to my silence, and the night moved on around us like a river that did not know what it was carrying. Lady Orin summoned me at 11:15. The carriages were being called. She gathered her wrap and her satisfaction and her careful social conclusions and swept toward the entrance with me behind her. At the top of the great staircase, I paused. Below, in the entrance hall, the Duke stood with his back to the stairs, seeing off the last of his senior guests, with the practiced ease of a man who had been performing his position since birth. His steward hovered nearby. A group of young lords clustered to his left, laughing at something I could not hear. As though he felt the pause, Dorian Greyholm turned his head. He looked up the staircase. He found me immediately, as though he had known exactly where to look. He said nothing. He simply held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he turned back to his guests. I descended the stairs and walked out into the cold night and climbed into Lady Orin's carriage and sat with my hands folded in my lap and the note pressed against my palm and my heart doing something I had firmly instructed it not to do. Lady Orin watched me for a long moment in the carriage darkness. "Whatever you are thinking," she said finally, "think very carefully first." "I am not thinking about anything," I said. She made a small sound that was not agreement. Then she looked out the window at the dark passing road and said nothing more. And I sat in the dark and thought of dark eyes and a rubbed neck and 4 words whispered low enough for only me to hear. And I thought of my father's name in precise, deliberate handwriting. And I thought that I had come to this gathering to be invisible. I had failed at that completely. And for the first time in 4 years, I was not entirely sorry. I sent the note to Mrs. Ketterley on a Tuesday. I had spent 3 days arguing with myself about it. I wrote it twice, burned the first attempt, rewrote the second, and then stood at the post office door for a full minute before going inside. Mrs. Ketterley was a round woman with sharp eyes, and the manner of someone who had kept secrets professionally for decades. She took my sealed letter without comment, asked no questions, and handed me a small receipt, as though this were entirely ordinary. I walked back to Lady Orvin's house in the cold morning air and told myself I had done nothing significant. I had simply replied to a letter. That was all. Lady Orvin said nothing about it. She had been watching me differently since the ball. Not warmly, Lady Orvin didn't do warmth, but with a new attentiveness that felt like reassessment. She gave me slightly better tasks. She stopped positioning me near walls at social calls and began including me in the sitting room when visitors came. Small changes. But in Lady Orvin's world, small changes were the only kind that meant anything. Lord Veyron called on her 4 days after the ball. I was in the adjoining room sorting correspondence when I heard his voice in the parlour. My hands went still. I set down the letters and listened without moving. The Duke was unusually social at his own gathering, Lord Veyron said pleasantly. Quite unlike him. He is his own man, Lady Orvin replied. Her voice was composed and gave nothing. Indeed. Though I noticed he took some interest in your companion. A pause. The Drummond girl. Another pause. Longer this time. Miss Drummond is a capable young woman, Lady Orvin said. Capable, Lord Veyron repeated, as though tasting the word. Yes, her father was capable too, in his way. A great pity what happened to him. His voice carried no pity whatsoever. These things tend to run in families, don't they? Certain stubborn qualities, certain unfortunate tendencies toward disruption. I gripped the edge of the writing desk. Will you take tea, Lord Veyron? Lady Orvin asked. The conversation shifted, but I understood the message perfectly. Lord Veyron had come to plant something in Lady Orvin's mind, a quiet warning dressed as polite observation. He was watching. He had noticed the Duke's attention, and he did not like it, and he was moving, carefully and early, to close whatever door might be opening. He was afraid of something. That thought arrived with a clarity that surprised me. Lord Veyron was afraid, not of me. I was nobody. But of whatever Dorian Greyholm might do with his attention directed at the daughter of the man he had destroyed. I picked up the letters again and continued sorting them with careful, steady hands. The reply from Mrs. Ketterley arrived 6 days after I had sent mine. It was brief. A time, a place, a single instruction. Come alone. The place was a small lending library on the far side of Thornvale Market. I knew it slightly. My father had taken me there twice as a child, once for a book on natural history, and once simply because he loved the smell of old paper and thought I should too. I had not been back since his death. I told Lady Orvin I needed thread from the market. She waved me off without looking up from her embroidery. The library was narrow and warm, its shelves reaching the ceiling, to its single window letting in pale winter light that fell in a long rectangle across the floor. An elderly man sat behind the counter reading, and did not look up when I entered. I found the natural history section at the back, as the note had instructed. Dorian Greyholm was already there. He was standing with a book open in his hands, reading as naturally as though he visited lending libraries in the middle of the week regularly. He was dressed plainly for a duke. No crest pin today. Dark coat, no decoration. He might have passed for a prosperous merchant, if not for the bearing, which was impossible to disguise. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. "Miss Drummond," he said. "Your Grace," I replied. He closed the book and placed it back on the shelf with the careful habit of someone who respected other people's property. But then he turned to face me fully, and I understood again, as I had at the ball, that this man gave his full attention the way other people gave their entire weight. There was no part of him that was somewhere else. "I will speak plainly," he said. "I dislike indirection." "Please do," I said. "Your father brought a case against Lord Veyron 4 years ago regarding a parcel of land in the south quarter of Thornvale. Specifically, the Merrow Acres. Your father argued the transfer of deed was fraudulent. He was correct." The air went out of the room. "I know he was correct," I said. He knew it too. It cost him everything. The documentation that would have proved it was removed from the county record office 3 weeks before the hearing, Dorian said. "I know this because I was attempting to retrieve the same documentation for an entirely separate matter and found it absent. I made inquiries. The trail led back to a clerk in Lord Veyron's household named Gosick. Gosick has since left the county." I stared at him. "You knew," I said slowly, "before the hearing. You knew the records were removed." "I knew afterward," he corrected. "Not before. When I understood what had happened, your father's case had already collapsed, and he had already been publicly discredited. I made further inquiries, but Veyron had covered the ground thoroughly." His jaw tightened slightly, the first visible crack in his composure. "I could not move against Veyron without the original documents. He knew that." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because Goswick has returned to the county," he said. "He arrived 3 weeks ago. He is staying at a lodging house in the East Quarter under a different name, but I have confirmed his identity, and he has in his possession a copy of the original deed transfer. The one that proves the fraud." The silence in the library was absolute. "Why would he keep a copy?" I asked. "Insurance," Dorian said simply. "Men like Goswick always keep something. They are not loyal. They are only paid." I pressed my hand against the bookshelf beside me. My mind was moving fast, and the room felt both very small and very large at the same time. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing dangerous," he said immediately. "I want you to understand what I am attempting and why." "Veyron is moving against you already, Miss Drummond. His visit to Lady Orvin was not casual. He is watching you because he is watching me, and he has connected those two things in his mind." "I know," I said. I heard him. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something he had suspected. "Then you understand the position. I will pursue Gosick through my own channels. But Veyron will attempt to move you out of the picture first. Dismissal from Lady Orvin's household would be his simplest method." "Lady Orvin would not dismiss me at Veyron's suggestion," I said. "Not at his suggestion," Dorian agreed, "but in a carefully arranged circumstance that left her feeling she had no choice. He is good at those." I knew that too. I had watched him be good at that with my father. "What do I do?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "You go back to Lady Orvin's house. You continue exactly as you have been. You give Veyron nothing to use, And you tell no one about this conversation. He paused. And you trust me. It was the last 3 words that were the hardest. Trust was not something I distributed freely anymore. My father had trusted the courts, and the process, and the fundamental fairness of the world, and it had killed him. Slowly but completely. I looked at Dorian Greyholm's face, at those sealed dark eyes that were, right now, entirely open in a way I suspected very few people ever saw them. "You haven't told me why this matters to you," I said. "My father was a solicitor. You are a duke. The Merrow Acres matter was small. Why does this still sit with you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Your father came to me," he said, "before the hearing. He asked for my support. He believed, reasonably, that my word on the matter would carry enough weight to offset Veyron's influence." Another pause. I told him I could not become involved in a land dispute between a solicitor and a lord, that it was not my position. The words landed between us. "He lost because you did not speak," I said. "Yes," he said, simply and without excuse. The library was very quiet. "I see," I said. "I do not ask for your forgiveness," he said. "I ask only for the opportunity to correct what I failed to prevent." I stood in the thin winter light and looked at the man who could have saved my father and did not, who was now standing in a lending library telling me he had spent 4 years carrying it. "All right," I said finally. "All right," he repeated. "I will trust you," I said. "Once. Do not waste it." I returned to Lady Orvin's house with a thread I had remembered to purchase at the last moment, and a secret I carried like a stone in my chest. 3 days passed quietly. On the 4th day, everything moved at once. It began at breakfast, when Lady Orvin received a letter that made her set down her teacup with a deliberateness that meant she was controlling her reaction. She read it twice, folded it, and looked at me across the table with an expression I had not seen from her before. "Lord Veyron has written to me," she said. I waited. "He suggests, very graciously, that my household might benefit from a reduction in staff, given certain social complications that have recently arisen." She touched the folded letter with one finger. "He names you specifically." "I see," I said. "Or he also suggests that your continued presence in my home could create difficulties for me at the Thornvale Ladies' Committee gathering next month." Her eyes were steady on mine. "He is very polite about it. He always is." "What will you do?" I asked. Lady Orvin was silent for a long moment. She picked up her teacup again, found it had gone cold, and set it back down. "My late husband," she said slowly, "borrowed a significant sum from Lord Veyron's father 20 years ago. That debt was forgiven, in writing, but the forgiveness was conditional on certain continued goodwill between our families." She paused. "Veyron inherited that condition, along with his father's estate. He has never used it. Until now." I understood. The debt was the mechanism. She had no clean choice. "I will go," I said, "but I will not put you in that position." "Sit down, Tessely," she said. I had not yet stood, but something in the use of my given name, the first time she had ever used it, made me go very still. "I am 71 years old," Lady Orvin said. "I have watched men like Veyron operate for 50 of those years. They use old debts and social consequences and quiet pressure, and they do it because it works. It works because people allow it to." She looked at the letter again. My husband's debt was repaid in full within the year of its making. Veyron's father acknowledged as much in his private correspondence, which I have kept. She lifted her chin. I believe in keeping things. I stared at her. You have the letters? I said. I have always had the letters, she said simply. I simply never had sufficient reason to use them. She folded her hands on the table. Apparently, I now have a reason. Something hot and sudden arrived behind my eyes. I pressed it back. Lady Orin, I said carefully. Do not thank me yet, she said briskly. We do not know what Veyron will do when his method fails. Men who are used to quiet success do not respond to obstruction gracefully. She pushed back her chair. I will send my reply this morning. In the meantime, you will tell me exactly what is happening between you and the Duke of Greyholm. I opened my mouth. The truth, please, she said. I am too old for the other kind. I told her most of it. The library. Gosick. My father's case. The missing documents. I left out the part where Dorian had confessed his failure. That felt like his to carry, not mine to distribute. Our Lady Orin listened without interrupting, which was remarkable. When I finished, she sat for a long moment looking at the cold fireplace. Gosick is the key, she said. Yes. And Greyholm intends to retrieve the copy of the deed. That is what he said. Then Veyron's move against you is a distraction, she said. He suspects something is in motion, and he is trying to disrupt it by removing the pieces he can reach. She turned to look at me. You are the piece he can reach. Greyholm is not. It was so clearly accurate that I wondered why I had not arranged it in exactly those terms myself. I had been thinking about it as two separate problems. Lady Orin had immediately seen it as one. He will not stop at the letter, I said. No, she agreed. He will not. He did not. 2 days later, a story began to circulate in Thornvale society. I heard it first from the kitchen maid, Dorry, who had heard it from the butcher's boy, who had heard it at the market. The story said that I had pursued the Duke of Greyholm deliberately at his own gathering, that my slapping him had been a calculated performance to attract his attention, and that I was the daughter of a fraudulent solicitor using an old family scandal to attach myself to a powerful name. The fraudulent part was what they had changed. My father was no longer the honest man destroyed by Veyron. In this version, he was the dishonest one, the guilty one. I sat in my small room that evening and read the letter that had arrived from Dorian through Mrs. Ketterley. He knew about the story. He called it exactly what it was. A reframing. Veyron was not just trying to remove me from Lady Orin's house anymore, but he was trying to bury my father's name so completely that no one would listen if the truth about the Merrow Acres ever surfaced. The letter said one other thing. Goswick had agreed to meet. It was arranged for the following Thursday at a private location outside the town. Dorian would be there. His man of affairs, a sharp and silent figure named Mr. Holt, would handle the legal documentation. A second witness, a retired county magistrate named Sir Branwell Oak, had agreed to attend. I was not asked to come, but at the bottom of the letter, in that same precise handwriting, was a single additional line. If you wish to be present when your father's name is restored, send word to Mrs. Ketterley by Wednesday noon. I will arrange it. I read that line 4 times. Then I went to Lady Orin. She was in her sitting room by the fire with her embroidery frame, and she looked up when I came in and read my face before I said a word. Thursday, I said. I heard, she said. She had her own channels. I had stopped being surprised by this. He has offered me the choice of being there, I said. Yes, she said. He has. Should I go? Lady Orin set her embroidery down. She looked at me with those sharp old eyes that had seen 50 years of Thornvale society and all its machinery. Your father spent his entire career arguing that the truth deserved a witness, she said. That justice was not justice if no one stood in the room to see it done. She picked her embroidery back up. I think you know what he would say. I sent the word to Mrs. Ketterley by Tuesday evening. Now Wednesday brought two developments, neither of which I had anticipated. The first was a visit from a woman I had not met before. She arrived at Lady Orvin's door mid-morning, announced herself as Mrs. Tura Holt, wife of Dorian's man of affairs, and asked to speak with me privately. She was a composed woman of middle age, with kind eyes, and a directness that immediately made me trust her. She had come, she said, because her husband had asked her to. Not on the Duke's instruction. On his own. My husband has worked for His Grace for 11 years, she told me quietly, sitting across from me in the small receiving room. He is not a man who speaks easily about his employer. But he asked me to come and tell you one thing. She folded her hands. The Duke has spent considerable private resources over the past 4 years, attempting to locate Goswick and the missing documents. Considerable. The kind that do not appear in account books. I absorbed that. He did not tell me that, I said. No, she said. He would not. He does not speak of his own efforts. My husband thought you should know regardless. She left shortly after, declining tea and requesting I mention her visit to no one except Lady Orin. The second development arrived in the afternoon. Lord Veyron appeared at the front door. Not a letter this time, in person, tall and lean and smiling with that blade behind his teeth. Lady Orin received him in the formal parlour. I was not summoned, but I stood in the corridor outside the closed door and listened with my heart in my throat. His voice came through clearly enough. What he had heard, he said pleasantly, that Lady Orin intended to disregard his kind suggestion regarding her staffing arrangements. He hoped she had not been given any misleading information. He hoped, further, that she understood the position she was placing herself in. Then his voice dropped, and I had to press closer to the door. He knew about the library meeting, he said. Not the details, but enough. He knew Greyholm had been speaking with the Drummond girl privately. He knew something was being arranged, and he wanted Lady Orin to understand that anything built on the testimony of a man like Goswick would be challenged, discredited, and dismantled before it ever reached a formal proceeding. Goswick, Lord Veyron said softly, is not a reliable man. Everyone knows that. A copy of a document held by an unreliable man is not evidence. It is a story. There was silence. Then Lady Orvin's voice came, clear and entirely without tremor. How very interesting, she said, that you know so specifically what Goswick does or doesn't have in his possession. A longer silence. Good afternoon, Lord Veyron, Lady Orin said. I stepped back from the door and stood in the corridor with my hands pressed flat against my sides, and something rising in my chest that was not quite hope and not quite fear, and was perhaps the feeling of a long-held door beginning, very slowly, to open. Thursday arrived with frost on the ground and a sky the colour of pale ash. I dressed before the light came fully through my window. My hands were steady, which surprised me. 4 years of waiting had a way of either destroying your nerves entirely or teaching them to be still. Mine had learned stillness the hard way. Lady Orin was already in the entrance hall when I came downstairs. She was dressed and gloved, and standing with the particular posture of a woman who had decided something and would not be argued with. "You are not coming," I said. "I am absolutely coming," she said. "Lady Orin." "Do not Lady Orin me in that tone," she said briskly. "I have the letters regarding the debt. I have held them for 20 years, waiting for a moment worthy of them. If you think I will sit by this fire while that moment happens without me, well, you have badly misjudged my character." She picked up a bag. "The carriage is ready." I looked at her for a moment, and then I did something I had never done in 2 years of living under her roof. I reached out and briefly pressed her gloved hand. She made a small sound of impatience and moved towards the door, but she did not pull her hand away before I let go. The meeting place was a stone farmhouse 3 miles outside Thornvale, on a lane that the frost had made quiet and pale. It belonged, Lady Orin told me on the drive, to Sir Branwell Oak, the retired magistrate. He had used it for private legal matters for 30 years, solid walls and no neighbours. Dorian's carriage was already outside when we arrived. He was standing at the farmhouse door with Mr. Holt beside him. And when our carriage came to a stop, he walked forward to meet it. His face, when he saw Lady Orin, was briefly, genuinely startled. Then he composed himself and extended his hand to assist her down the carriage step. "Lady Orin," he said. "Your Grace," she replied pleasantly. "Shall we proceed?" He looked at me over her head. I offered nothing. He almost smiled. Inside, the farmhouse was plain and warm, a fire built high, a long table set with papers and ink pots. Sir Branwell Oak was a heavy man in his late 60s with white side whiskers and the gravelly manner of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms and trusted very little but observed everything. He greeted Lady Orin with genuine warmth. They knew each other apparently. Thornvale was, in the end, a small world. Goswick was already seated at the table. He was smaller than I had imagined. A slight man in his 50s with the look of someone who had spent years being careful. He had the document case on the table in front of him, and his hands folded over it, and his eyes moving between everyone in the room, with the constant low alertness of a man who was never entirely comfortable anywhere. He looked at me when I entered, and something moved across his face. Recognition, or something close to it. "You are the solicitor's daughter," he said. "I am," I said. He looked back at the table. "He was a good man," he said quietly. "I knew it when I did what I did." That did not stop me. He said it flatly, without self-pity, which somehow made it worse and better at the same time. At least it was honest. Sir Branwell called the room to order with the ease of long practice. Goswick opened the document case. What came out was a folded paper, brown at the edges, the handwriting on it old but clear. A deed transfer for the Merrow Acres, dated 6 years prior, bearing Lord Veyron's signature and 2 witness signatures, and a notation in the margin in different ink that could only be read as an instruction to alter the transfer date before filing. Sir Branwell examined it for a long time without speaking. Mr. Holt made notes. Lady Orin sat with perfect stillness and watched everything. Dorian stood near the window throughout the examination. He did not hover over the table. He did not crowd the process. He stood apart and let it happen, and I understood, watching him, that this was how he operated. He arranged things, and then he stepped back and trusted the arrangement to work. It was either confidence or hard-won wisdom, and I suspected it was both. Sir Branwell looked up at last. "This is sufficient," he said. 3 words, but they landed in that room like something physical, like a door slamming open after years of being locked. I pressed my hand flat against the table edge, not because I was unsteady, because I needed to feel something solid while the room realigned itself around those 3 words. Dorian turned from the window. His eyes went directly to me. Not to Sir Branwell, not to Mr. Holt. To me. I looked back at him, and I could not speak, and I did not try. Sir Branwell continued. The documentation would be filed formally with the county court within the week. The notation in the margin constituted clear evidence of instruction to commit fraud in a legal proceeding. Lord Veyron would be summoned. Yet the process would be slow, and it would be contested, because men like Veyron always contested. But the original document was now in proper legal custody, and could not be made to disappear a second time. Goswick accepted a document of his own, something Mr. Holt had prepared, and signed it without reading it twice. He had negotiated his terms already, whatever they were. He picked up his empty document case, nodded to no one in particular, and left. Sir Branwell shook hands with Dorian, bowed to Lady Orin, and excused himself to the next room to begin his records. Mr. Holt gathered his papers with quiet efficiency and followed, which left Lady Orin, Dorian, and me in the room by the fire. Lady Orin looked between us with the expression of someone who has arranged things to their satisfaction and is now prepared to be elsewhere, or she rose from her chair with great dignity. "I find I need some air," she announced. "It is freezing outside," I said. "I find I need it regardless," she said, and walked out the door with perfect serenity. The room was very quiet. Dorian moved away from the window and came to stand a few feet from me near the table. He looked at the empty space where the document had been, then at me. "Your father's case can be formally reopened now," he said. "His reputation will be restored through the court record. It will take time, but it will happen." "I know," I said. "I am sorry it took this long," he said. "You said you did not ask forgiveness," I reminded him. I said I did not ask for it. He agreed, but I did not say I stopped feeling the need for it. We stood in the warmth of Sir Branwell's fire, and I looked at this man who had failed my father and spent 4 years trying to undo that failure, and I thought about what it cost a person to carry something like that, to know exactly what they had not done when it mattered, and to keep knowing it. "My father would have forgiven you," I said. "He was that kind of man." "I know," Dorian said quietly. That made it worse. Outside, a cold wind moved through the lane and made the farmhouse timbers settle. The fire cracked and shifted. "What happens now?" I asked. "Veyron will hear about this within days," he said. "He will respond, probably loudly and through his network of social and legal contacts. It will be unpleasant for a period." He paused. "But the document is with Sir Branwell now. It cannot be undone." "He will come after me," I said. "Yes," Dorian said. "He did not dress it otherwise, and I valued that. He will attempt to discredit you specifically. Your name, your father's old scandal, your association with me. He will use all of it." He looked at me steadily. "I intend to make that considerably more difficult for him." "How?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. His expression had changed to something I had not seen before. Not the sealed composure of the ballroom, not the precise deliberateness of the library. Something more careful, more considered, as though he was choosing words for something that mattered too much for his usual directness. Before he could speak, the farmhouse door opened, and Mr. Holt looked in. "Forgive me, Your Grace. Or Sir Branwell requires a signature on the custody document before we leave." Dorian looked at me for one more moment. "We will finish this conversation," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "We will." He went through to the next room, and I stood alone by the fire and pressed my hands together and told my heart very firmly to behave itself. It did not listen. On the drive back to Thornvale, Lady Orin sat across from me in the carriage and looked out the frost-pale window and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "He looked at you the way my husband used to look at me." I stared at her. She continued looking out the window. My husband was also a reserved man, formal in company, careful with his words. A small pause. In private, he was the most honest person I have ever known. She said nothing more for the remainder of the drive. I sat with the frost-covered fields moving past outside, and Lady Orvin's words sitting in the carriage between us like a lit candle in a dark room, small and steady and impossible to ignore. The week that followed was the strangest of my life. Lord Veyron's response came swiftly, and exactly as Dorian had predicted. The story circulating about me grew sharper, more specific, more damaging. Lady Veyron began holding her particular kind of small gatherings, where particular things were said in quiet rooms. Two of Lady Orvin's acquaintances withdrew their social calls without explanation. Lady Orin sent each of them a brief and entirely pleasant letter, noting that she had documentation regarding a matter they might find interesting, and would be glad to discuss it at their earliest convenience. Both calls were reinstated within the week. Through Mrs. Ketterley came a steady, quiet stream of short letters, never long, never elaborate. Progress reports and practical notes. Dorian wrote the way he spoke, plainly and with purpose. I replied in kind, though I was sometimes aware of things I was not saying, and suspected he was too. On the 9th day after the farmhouse meeting, a different letter arrived. It was addressed to Lady Orin, not to me, and she brought it to me herself after reading it, which told me something before I even opened it. It was from Dorian. He wrote to inform Lady Orin that Lord Veyron had been formally summoned by the county court. The date was set. The document was entered into the official record. The hearing would take place in 6 weeks. He wrote that he intended to provide a formal supporting statement, as he should have done 4 years prior. He wrote that Sir Branwell had confirmed the document's authenticity beyond legal challenge. At the bottom, below the formal close, was a single additional line in that precise handwriting. I would be grateful for the opportunity to call on Lady Orvin's household at her convenience. There is a matter I wish to raise in person. Lady Orin looked at me over the top of the letter. "Well," she said. "Well," I agreed. She set a date for the following Tuesday. Tuesday came in cold and clear, the kind of winter morning that had no softness in it anywhere except the light, which fell thin and gold across the frost and made everything look like it had been carefully placed. I had not slept well. Not from fear exactly, from the particular restlessness of someone standing at the edge of something and not yet knowing the shape of what was on the other side. Lady Orin was entirely composed, which was either natural to her or a performance so long practiced it had become the same thing. She arranged the formal sitting room herself, which she had not done in years, directing the placement of chairs and the fire screen, and the tea service, with the authority of a general who was also an excellent host. Dorian arrived precisely on time. He came with only his steward, no larger retinue, or which Lady Orin noted with a small approving tilt of her chin. He greeted her with full formal courtesy, and then he looked at me, and something in his expression shifted to that careful, considered look I had last seen in the farmhouse. We sat. Tea was poured, and then Dorian, who had said he disliked indirection, proved it once again. "Lady Orin," he said, "I am grateful for your time. I will not use more of it than necessary." He set his teacup down precisely. "I intend to speak to Miss Drummond about a matter of some personal significance. I ask your permission to do so, with you present if you prefer." Lady Orin looked at him for a long, level moment. "I prefer," she said. He nodded. Then he turned to me. "Miss Drummond," he said. "Your Grace," I replied, and my voice was steady, which I considered a personal achievement. "No, I want to speak plainly about several things," he said. "And I ask you to let me finish before you respond." "All right," I said. "I have known a number of people in my life who were brave," he began. "My father was brave in the manner of men who were never afraid of anything, which is perhaps not bravery at all, but simply the absence of imagination." The corner of his mouth moved. "You are brave in the manner of someone who is afraid of a great many things and does them anyway. That is considerably more impressive." I pressed my hands together in my lap and said nothing. "I failed your father," he continued. "I have said that. I will carry it. What I haven't said is that, in trying to correct that failure, I have been given the particular and entirely unexpected consequence of coming to know you." He paused. "And I find that consequence to be, by some considerable distance, the most significant thing that has happened to me in many years." The fire settled in the grate. Lady Orin was very still in her chair. "I am aware of the differences in our positions," Dorian said. "I am aware that what I am about to say will seem, to some minds, extraordinary. I am aware that you have no reason to trust easily, and every reason to approach this with caution." His voice remained even throughout, but there was something beneath it, something held with great effort in a steady position. "I am asking you, Tessalie Drummond, if you will consider becoming my wife." The room was absolutely silent. I looked at him. "You are not doing this because of my father," I said. It was not an accusation. It was a question that needed answering. "No," he said immediately. "I am doing what I must for your father because it is right. This is separate, entirely." He held my gaze. "I want to be clear about that, because I suspect you will not accept anything built on obligation. You are, as I have observed, deeply inconveniently principled." Lady Orin made a small sound that might, from any other woman, have been a laugh. "You are a duke," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "I am the daughter of a disgraced solicitor." "A wrongly disgraced solicitor," he corrected, "who will be formally vindicated within 6 weeks, and whose daughter has more character in one borrowed glove than most rooms full of titled people I have spent my life enduring." I looked at him for a long, steady moment. "I am not accomplished," I said. "I cannot play the piano well. I dance badly. I have no fortune and no connections, and I will likely slap your neck again if the occasion demands it." This time, the movement at the corner of his mouth completed itself fully. A real smile, unhurried and entirely unguarded, and it changed his face so completely that I understood, suddenly and without question, that very few people had ever seen it. "I remember making a request about that," he said quietly. The warmth that moved through my chest was not the fire. I turned to Lady Orin. She was watching me with those sharp old eyes that had seen everything and judged very little of what mattered. She said nothing. She simply looked at me with the expression of a woman who has held a letter for 20 years, waiting for the right moment, and knows, when it arrives, exactly what it looks like. I turned back to Dorian. "There are conditions," I said. He straightened slightly. "Name them." "My father's name is fully restored through the court before any announcement is made. Not after. Before." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "I will not be managed," I said. "Not publicly, not privately. I will speak my mind, and you will hear it." "I would not have it otherwise," he said. "A woman who says nothing useful in a room full of opinions is not someone I would know what to do with." "And you will tell me things," I said. "The way you told me about Goswick and the farmhouse and the 4 years of trying. Not afterward. Not through stewards and careful notes. To me, directly." He was quiet for a moment. "That will not always come easily," he said honestly. "I am not practiced at it." "I know," I said. "I am not asking for easy, but I am asking for the truth." He held my gaze. "True," he said. "Yes, I can promise you, true." The frost outside had begun to soften in the morning light, the thin gold of it pressing through the window glass and laying itself across the floor between us. "Then yes," I said. He exhaled, slowly and quietly, and I understood that he had been holding that breath for longer than the duration of this conversation. Lady Orin rose from her chair with great ceremony, collected her teacup, and announced that she required a word with the housekeeper about the luncheon arrangements, a task that would surely occupy her for a considerable time. She left the room with the satisfied expression of a woman who had spent 2 years waiting for someone in her household to be worthy of notice, and had been proven correct in her patience. But the room was warm and quiet and full of winter light. Dorian looked at me across the short space between our chairs, and his expression was open in the way I had first seen in the library, fully present, nothing sealed, nothing held back. "I should tell you," he said, "that the spider at the ball was not the first time I noticed you." I blinked. We had never met. "No," he agreed, "but I had read your father's case files 2 years before the ball, when I was attempting to trace Goswick. Your father had written his own notes in the margins of his legal papers." He paused. "He wrote about you, about his daughter who argued with him about the natural history book in the lending library because she thought the chapter on spiders was longer than necessary." Something broke open in my chest, very gently. "He wrote that in his legal papers?" I managed. "In the margins," Dorian said, "next to a note about witness testimony." He looked at me carefully. He wrote that she was the bravest person he knew, and that she did not yet understand it. I pressed my lips together. The fire blurred slightly, and I blinked it clear. "And then," Dorian continued quietly, "a woman appeared in my ballroom and slapped my neck because of a spider, and I knew, before I even turned around, that I already knew who she was." Outside, the last of the frost was releasing itself from the ground, the cold morning giving way degree by degree to something less sharp. The lane beyond the window was pale and quiet and entirely ordinary. Inside, near the fire, with the winter light between us and my father's name on the road back to where it had always belonged. I sat across from Dorian Greyholm and thought that some things take 4 years and a spider and a lending library and an old woman with 20-year-old letters to arrive. 6 weeks later, Lord Veyron stood before the county court and had no answer for the document that Sir Branwell Oak presented. He had answers for everything else. He had lawyers and connections, and the long-practiced ease of a man who had never been held to account. But he had no answer for the original deed with the notation in the margin in different ink. My father's case was formally declared wrongly decided. His record was cleared. His name was restored. I stood in the back of the courtroom with Lady Orin on my left and Mrs. Tura Holt on my right. And when Sir Branwell read the finding aloud, I looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly and let 4 years of held weight release itself without making a sound. Dorian was at the front of the room. He did not look back at me during the reading. He did not need to. But when it was finished, and the room began to move and fill with noise, he turned, and across the length of that courtroom, in front of everyone, he simply looked at me. I looked back. Lady Orin pressed my hand once, briefly, and then released it, and began putting on her gloves. The announcement of our engagement was made at the Thornvale Spring Gathering 3 weeks later, in a room full of people who had spent months watching and wondering and speculating. It caused, I was told, considerable sensation. I was not concerned with sensation. I was standing near the east wall, out of old habit, when Dorian came and stood beside me. Not because I had been placed there, not because I was trying to be invisible, simply because the east wall had the best view of the room. "You are doing it again," he said. "The wall?" I said. "The wall," he confirmed. "It has a good view," I said. He looked out at the room with me and said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, close enough that only I could hear it, he said, "Do you know what I thought when you slapped me?" "You thought I was reckless and alarming," I said. "I thought," he said, "that I had been standing in rooms full of people for 15 years, and not one of them had ever once actually touched me." I turned to look at him. His expression was quiet and entirely unguarded. "And then you did," he said simply. The music started in the center of the room. Couples moved toward the floor. Candles threw their gold light across everything and everyone, and the whole long, ordinary, extraordinary machinery of the world turned on. I stood beside Dorian Greyholm at the east wall and felt, for the first time in 4 years, exactly the right size for the room I was standing in. Not invisible, not a companion pressed against a wall waiting to be useful, but simply myself.